Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Code with Italians. Today we have our former recurring guest back. Former in the sense that
How does it work? I mean,
it's been
if
a
it's
while.
if it's back, is this again recurring? How does it work?
No, so the thing is, when Chris used to come all the time, it was a technically semi-separate sub-series. It was designed with Italians. So is Chris a new guest on the main line series now? Oh man, I should have thought about this question before I pressed the live button.
So
Anyway,
we are
at
still
this
talking about
point,
design.
Yeah,
Chris, do you want to introduce yourself? Because maybe the people that didn't follow the Design with Italian series, they don't
should.
know. So, what do you do, Chris?
I finger paint on day to day. No, I'm the design lead on AndroidStudio and other things like work on Jetpack Compose. So
That's fantastic. So you mean you are Sebastiano's boss?
for now, yes.
What do you mean for now?
Yes, this is gonna be fun.
What do you mean for now? Wait a second.
There's
Spoiler.
probably some other reorg happening, and
Fair enough.
who knows what will happen.
So one day you wake up and I'm your boss? Just like, what the fuck
Yeah.
happened?
I mean, that's
unlikely.
that wouldn't be a surprise. Like I've been woken up to too many surprises in the last year. So
Yeah.
Adventurous lives. This is starting well. I mean,
to fewest surprises as possible.
True story. Cheers. True story.
So yes, back to the main topic. Today we're going to be talking about the new UI in AndroidStudio. So folks that have been following us for a while, they have actually seen the new UI in action because I've been using it ever since before it was officially available in Studio. Because I was using it in IntelliJ and I really, really liked it. So every time I share the screen, you saw the new UI. But why is there a new UI? What is the new UI? What does it do differently, and why? Is the reason why we have Chris here today, because he knows a lot about this stuff. I'm the person that goes and fixes bugs. He's the person that knows what should happen instead of what's happening. So, Chris, I mean, I think we should be able to start in a minute, but I forgot that it's Ivan's moment to shine now. Go, Ivan.
Oh yeah, no, very quickly. Yes, I'm waiting for this. So thank you for the support. And if you want to buy any other t-shirt that I have been wearing so far, apart from this one, you can find that on our store. The link is going to be in the description on YouTube, and keep an eye on the chat. The bot is going to just give you the link. If you want to buy the keychain, we have also the stickers that you can buy to support us. And you can also subscribe to our Twitch channel. And if you have an Amazon Prime subscription, you can subscribe for free. How? You can connect your Amazon Prime account to your Amazon gaming account, and then from the gaming account to the Twitch account. I almost did it. So, hola and bienvenidos a todos a el Código con los Italianos. Ahora, hoy tenemos Chris. Bienvenidos, Chris. I'm hating this so much. Gracias por gracias por la ayuda. Y si quieres comprar la camiseta de Código con los Italianos, go, I don't know how is it. Go to the store, la tienda de ropa de Code with Italians. Gracias, Mark. I really enjoy this moment every single week. Back to the stream.
Yes. So, Chris, maybe a good place to start would be to show people what the new UI is about. So, or actually, no, before that, why is there a new UI? Like, I'm not saying there shouldn't be, but I guess the biggest question of them all is, why are we investing on a new UI? Why are we, together with JetBrains, why are we changing the way the IDE looks?
It's a complicated question, but part of I think, IntelliJ is a pretty old product. It's I think almost over 2 decades old, and
22.
I think 22 years old. Yeah, and so part of the reason I think is, their design. They didn't really have a design team, I think, until about 6 years ago when I joined Google. And so all the time before that, I think they obviously had a great product, but they didn't necessarily have like a design eye for the product. And they were just designing features and designing the UI, not necessarily thinking about how it scales to a wider audience. And so when they brought their design team on, I think as designers do, the first thing they want to do is like just redesign the whole thing because they didn't do it.
Sounds a lot like
the best
engineers.
idea. Yeah, and that's not the best idea, of course, like, and not the best approach. And so I think what the design team did back then was like try to figure out what are the biggest pain points with using IntelliJ from the UX perspective, and then start to kind of chip away at those. And then I think over time, as they worked at fixing certain things and then updating the design and the UI little by little, it was going okay, but there were still some like fundamental problems with the core design of the UI that they couldn't overcome. And so, I think it's not necessarily that their users were asking for it, but I think they realized like they wanted to kind of do an experiment and see like if we could reimagine what the UI could look like. And this, I think they started this effort back in roughly 2020, 2021. What would that look like in 2020 or 2021 versus like, I think whenever IntelliJ came out, that was 22 years ago. And so what they did is they ended up kind of looking at all the developer tools that were out there, from VS Code to Visual Studio to Xcode to Sublime, Atom, and all other, products you see, just to kind of gain inspiration for like what design like really resonates with developers today. And so it actually did start as an experiment. It wasn't necessarily the priority for the IntelliJ platform in the beginning. But then through some of that exploration, the platform team really liked it, and they spent a lot of time actually iterating and getting feedback and like working internally with folks at JetBrains to actually arrive at a design that like people really liked, and that even they themselves, they found they were productive in, since I don't know if others know, but like it's the IntelliJ team uses IntelliJ to build IntelliJ. And so any design change that they introduce from the UI point of view, they have to suffer through if it's a bad decision. And so, I think what was interesting was when IntelliJ did release the new UI or announce it, I think it was last year, there's definitely a lot of negative feedback or a lot of reaction to a screenshot that was like, oh, why did you do this? Like, this is so unusable, et cetera, et cetera. But it's funny because it's like, well, the IntelliJ team uses this. So it's like, if it was that unusable, they probably wouldn't have done it, because then they would have lowered their
how
productivity.
About shut up?
Come on.
I mean,
how about shut up? Yeah, people are working with this thing and they like it. How about shut up, Twitter? I mean, there is always one of those dudes, right? Never shipped anything, never worked on anything. This is shit.
But they have opinions, man.
But I mean, everybody has opinion. Nowadays, it's like a curse. Tell me the truth. So the reality, how did it go? So you showed this, and they were like, boom, ship it, we love it. And they were like, wait. This is just I just have screenshots of this thing. Wait, do you think that it's not working yet? Is it not already working? Yeah, that was it, right? Tell me the truth. They saw it and they wanted to ship it. And now we need to build it. No?
Oh, you mean how did it go at JetBrains?
In general, right? The usual
Yeah.
with when you show something, and they're like, we love this. How can we use it? When will we use it? It was like, no. This is not ready.
This is a
just
mock-up. Do you see Figma
this
at the
is-
top of the window?
we are. This is just to start the conversation. Yeah, but we love it. So, is it already available? No, because this has been my whole life. This has been like this, right? So I expect also from the design point of view, that's the same. It's gonna be the same.
Yeah. No, I think I remember, and this was now maybe in like late 2020. I remember the team telling me they were exploring this, and I was like, oh, interesting. And then they showed me a few explorations, and I was like, can this happen now? Like, what? Like we need this now. And they were like, no, it's going to take a while. And it did take a while, actually. I mean, and we're still on that journey now, which we can get into more. But yeah, I think overall the why, I think one is just having an updated design language. I think, it's interesting because many developers or just users of productivity tools will say like the UI doesn't matter. Except when the UI is really nice, then all of a sudden they're like, oh, it does matter. And so it's funny because a lot of people are very quick to point out design they hate, but when it's design that they like, there will be some people who say I love it, but then most of the time people will just say, yeah, it's fine if you ask them. So it can be kind of a tricky business to do design for productivity tools like developer tools or even tools like Figma. But the design goals were, one, to have a more modern UI. So something that feels more modern with all the other applications you use. The other one, though, was like to actually try to make it a simpler UI up front, because a lot of folks, even new and existing users of IntelliJ or AndroidStudio, kind of the first time you open the IDE, it's like there's a ton of functionality, as we know, but you don't necessarily need all of that functionality up front. And for new users, it can be overwhelming. And actually, interestingly, like for people who've used the product for a long time, they end up turning off or hiding a ton of features, not because they don't need it, but like most of the time, they don't need to see it all the time. They're like, okay, I really just want to focus on the code because that's where I spend most of my eyes and mind on.
The clutter.
And then everything else kind of is a distraction. And so there is, this mindset of like people want a more minimalistic UI. And so that's what we also try to strive for. So hoping, it's a more modern look, of course, so it just looks great, but also I think functionally it works better for people because it reduces a lot of the clutter that we've seen in the past with the older design. And I think for new users especially, like maybe it'll be less intimidating because they actually, the JetBrains or IntelliJ team had done a lot of research while doing this new UI, and a lot of their new users will say, oh, like IntelliJ is like very heavyweight. There's like too many features and I'm overwhelmed. And so I think part of that was responding to that feedback as well.
I mean, the features are still there. They're just not all dumped in front of your face at the same time the first time you open it.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's the thing that people reacted to the most was they saw the screenshot and they're like, oh my God, you took away like 80% of the features. And for those who did try it, they're like, actually, no, everything's literally there. Like there is no, I don't believe there was any code just like removed. It's like every single feature that someone used, it's there. It may not be immediately discoverable or on the toolbar or in your face, but it's there. And so it is the same IDE from a functional and feature perspective. And I think once once people tried it, I think they did realize that very quickly, and they were like, "Oh, okay, phew!" Like it's not like, I think people were worried. They're like, "Oh my God, you made VS Code, so you like took out 80% of the features."
Yeah,
That wouldn't really make sense for something like IntelliJ.
Yeah, but especially if you are familiar with the shortcuts, and find action kind of workflow. I mean, even before, I have no idea where the stuff is in the menu. right? I mean, I can't actually remember where is, this thing that I use in the menu. So it's more like find action, I search what I want, and end of the story. But I really like the fact that you have less stuff, right? From a how can we, like a processing point of view, from a
Cognitive load.
Exactly. And also there is a very high temperature in this room at the moment. But again, when you talk about reducing the clutter, reducing the things that you need to process, I've worked, for instance, with people that don't even have, and when you start turning off things, I turn off a few things in IntelliJ and AndroidStudio. I work with people that don't even have tabs. And for me, that's a bit extreme. No, but I'm serious. I mean, Joseph didn't use tab, and I was like, how do you function in this thing? Because I have shortcuts to actually move through tabs, right? That kind of workflow for me was inconceivable. But again, he was looking for even fewer things, right, to actually distract him on the UI. So I really agree on, you try to remove over time. You don't want to see too many things all the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think one of the other things that ended up, I think, adding clutter over time was, IntelliJ has a very rich plugin ecosystem, but because of that, plugins could kind of introduce their own tool windows to the IDE, and like that would clutter things up even more. And so it's like managing all your plugins and all that stuff. Like it, I think the IDE wasn't doing a great job of helping people manage the plugins that were being added. And so I think that caused even more clutter.
Yeah, to clarify this, plugins still can create tool windows, but they're hidden by default in the overflow. So you have to like you have to want to open them, and then you can see them. But it doesn't, like, you don't restart the IDE and find you suddenly have 3 more tool windows you didn't know existed because you installed the wrong plugin.
But you can restart your IDE and you find a new progress bar with an angry pizza icon and an Italian flag.
I found so many bugs. I found so many bugs in their plugin. I need to fix them. Well, I need to find the time to fix them.
Well, that's baby steps, Sebastian. Baby steps. For now, I enjoy the shaky pizza, and it looks like he's having a stroke at some point. It's just starts shaking.
That's a bug.
No shit.
I mean,
I thought it was a feature.
It's partially a bug. It's not entirely a bug.
I love it. So where do we want to go from here, Sebastiano? Now we know the why.
I was just putting the link to the plugin in the chat. So if you have a question in the meantime while I do that.
So let's see. So from a new UI, because I haven't been using this before it was in AndroidStudio. So what we have in AndroidStudio now is the same thing that it was before in IntelliJ. I mean, is it, or from an Android point of view, we added more stuff, or removed more stuff?
We haven't removed anything, I think.
Yeah. We haven't removed anything. I mean, it would be interesting one day to dive deep on IntelliJ merges in Studio. That's a whole nother stream.
Yeah.
But
we should invite Raluca.
Yeah. Yeah. But what you see in AndroidStudio, it's we do inherit everything from the IntelliJ platform. There are certain things in general outside of the new UI that we don't always include in AndroidStudio for several reasons. But as far as the new UI, IntelliJ kind of has like a base look of it, and then for the plugin, which is the Android plugin, or at least for AndroidStudio, like we've built things on top of that. So it uses all the platform APIs, but we've added things by default. Like we added our own actions that we found were important. We've added like the device dropdown. One thing we had to do, which was not going to come from the platform, is we had to redesign all our icons to match the new style. And so that actually took several months because we have about 600 icons that we had to redraw. And so that took a fair amount of time and review. And we worked with the IntelliJ team as well to make sure they looked good. And then the other piece is like we have a ton of features in AndroidStudio in general that are not from the platform. And so we had to make sure those all worked with the new UI, like they didn't crash or, colors looked okay or they were loading correctly. And that's side note, some areas that Sebastiano has been very helpful with his Swig knowledge is going in and dissecting and figuring out why some feature looks like crap in the new UI.
That's fun.
Yeah.
I mean, it is fun. Like it's one of those things where you start by saying, I've never used that thing. I have no idea where the code for that stuff is. Then you find out and you start digging and digging and digging and digging, and you go like 5 levels down and 3 classes to the side, and you're like, oh, so that if else is what breaks stuff. That is yesterday morning, by the way.
Yeah.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, if we want, I can kind of show you like the progression of. I mean, we can actually visually talk through all the new UI changes, but we can also talk about like what it looked like before and how it has evolved actually through all the different IntelliJ releases and all the different AndroidStudio releases. Because I think it speaks to the story of like how IntelliJ has rolled out the new UI, which I think has actually been very good. I think their approach.
Yeah, let's do
and we're
that.
taking a similar one.
Let's do this. Shall we show your screen then?
Sure.
Boom. Done. Now everyone can see the same chat that they see on their own screen.
Nice. So you can see my 4 versions of Studio.
You sure are keeping Toolbox busy.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's see. What do I? Yeah, I have to have like many versions of IntelliJ and AndroidStudio installed.
Looks like mine.
Yeah. But yeah, I think, well, one thing is, for people who are generally curious about the new UI, JetBrains made this very fancy web page. Actually, if you refresh it, it's pretty sweet. Like it has this like loading animation. You can play this video. And
we were talking
sizzle reel.
before we started. Chris was saying, "Oh, I wish we could have those animations in real life as well."
Yeah,
I get it.
Not yet, but maybe that'll be a different stream.
Probably different stream.
But yeah, it's a very simple website, but like it does walk through all the different changes in the new UI. I think for AndroidStudio, we won't have a web page like this necessarily, or not as fancy for sure. But we will have something around like an FAQ to help people understand like what changed in the UI and where things have, if they had a feature, where did it go? I think to your point, Ivan, about learning the new UI, like there's going to be an initial kind of drop in productivity because it's unfamiliar to you, and then so we're hoping that some of our documentation can kind of jumpstart that and help people know, like, oh, the feature you used to use is now here. So, yeah. Let's see. All right. And so, okay, someone had a question. Will get the color? Yes. I mean, I hope so.
It's up to us, Chris. It's up to us. Let's do it. I want it. It looks nice.
Yeah. Actually, I can talk about that for a sec because there is kind of an interesting thing about that specifically. It's this thing, right?
Yeah.
This nice gradient here. Yeah. So one consistent piece of feedback that IntelliJ has gotten is that their new UI looks a lot like VS Code, which just to for the record, I am the original designer of VS Code, so I would say yes. Yes, it does, but
you did. I didn't
it,
see that. I didn't know about that. So that was very good. That was very good. It was very
yeah,
smooth.
yeah. It does, but I think there are a lot of things that they improved upon that are very IntelliJ specific that I think a lot of people don't give them enough credit for. Oh, can I full screen the window? Oh, it's this one. Sorry. Yeah. Or I guess, maybe I can just hide all the other ones. Let's see. So
You just
many.
want to show off your amazing wallpaper.
Oh yeah. You just look at that. That's the stream, just looking at wallpaper.
Yeah, I can do that.
Nice.
It's serene.
Yeah, and actually I think I don't know. Oh, can they? Oh no, I thought the IDE
You can,
kind of
you
zoom.
can zoom the IDE now. Not in Studio. It's
looks-
not in Studio because it's new in
Yeah.
23.2, I
Yeah.
think. But
Yeah.
we'll get it.
Granted, this looks not great, but you can, for those on the stream, you can kind of see it.
I mean, it's better
No,
than what we used to do, which is just setting a larger font. At least this also resizes icons and stuff.
Yeah. So back to the VS Code comment. So, I mean, that's the consistent feedback they've gotten at least, over the last year. And what's interesting is that part of the reason that people have reacted that way, and this isn't something that I had like planned years ago, because I actually worked on VS Code like a long time ago now. Like I left that team back in 2015, so it's been a while. But I think that is what's been interesting about that design of VS Code is like that has kind of like stuck for a long time, which I feel good about because it means like I guess the design worked really well that we never had to really change it. But it's actually kind of percolated across a lot of other developer tools where the other developer tools just started to like look more modern. And so when they came and they did this, like VS Code is a competitor to IntelliJ, but the goal wasn't to just copy them. I think they wanted to do something that was IntelliJ specific. The thing though that the reason I talk about is because what we've found is that the reason people think it looks like VS Code is primarily the left toolbar. That's like the one, if VS Code ended up having like a distinct UI element that like a trademark, that was that's the thing that people often
Maybe
quickly go
the
to.
icon
It's like,
style in combination
Yeah.
with that.
Yeah, the icon style and then the left toolbar. But then like if you take that away, everything else is not really like VS Code. And so what the team and they got this feedback consistently. And so I think what they're trying to do right now, which is why we first see this now in 23.2 AP, is try to, in this top left quadrant, which is where the human eye tends to gravitate to quickly or just naturally, is to make it look distinct from VS Code like within 5 seconds. And it's, I think a lot of us as developers are like, well, that's crazy. Like, why would you spend all this effort to do that? But it does impact, I think, things like people's perception. And so I think IntelliJ, they didn't want to just feel like a VS Code clone. And in my humble opinion, as the original designer, I don't think it is. I think there are UI elements that they borrowed which worked well, like like the way this is presented. But the way this behaves is very unique to IntelliJ, and I think works really well for their window management system. Like the way VS Code's navigation works, it looks like this, but it does not function the same way. And so I think that the designs that IntelliJ decided to do, I think I really like. And I would say it's like, in my opinion, it's kind of like an evolution of what was done in VS Code. So, but yeah, so what they did was they added this gradient. So like, if you load a different project, then this gradient will kind of change. And I think it's neat because this gradient shows up in every theme. Yeah, even the light header theme, which is cool. Even in custom themes like Darkula, High Contrast, IntelliJ Light, which is an older theme, and then I think if you can install a custom theme, of course, but yeah. All right.
Yeah, Maya's question is interesting. I don't know if you know, Chris, but do people who read right to left or top down also have their eyes gravitate towards the top left?
I don't know. It's a good question. I think people would naturally, like in their brain, instinctually do that. I think because though a lot of software has been kind of like biased towards left to right, maybe people's minds have been trained to kind of look that way. Interestingly though, like layout wise, Visual Studio, not Visual Studio Code, but Visual Studio on Windows, I always thought was interesting was their project view, or they call it the Solution Explorer, is on the right side.
Yeah.
I think by default, which when I started working at Microsoft back then, I thought I didn't really think about it, but then when I started using every other tool, it's like, oh, all these other tools go from left to right, and it was interesting that Visual Studio had decided to go from right to left. I don't know if that was a conscious decision based on RTL or LTR, but yeah, I think it kind of depends. But I think what's good about the IDE is like you can move these things around, and so I think if you instinctually actually go right to left, then it can be configured to go that way.
Yeah,
But yeah,
I always liked.
we do end up reading code left to right. That's true. Go ahead. No,
I was just appreciating the fact that you can move in IntelliJ and AndroidStudio things around. For instance, I always swap the Git, the commit dialog, that it by default is on the right, and I actually like it on the left. But then the structure panel that is on the left, I always move it on the right. And if you the structure, for instance, and now I actually realize, because I don't actually know if it was the same in the past, but then you have two regions above and below the three dots, Sebastiano, on the left side.
Mm-hmm.
And if you move something below the region, is basically opening actually below the, for instance, the tree. You have like a separator, right? So
Yeah.
it's not below the three dots, but you see what I mean. I never actually thought about that, and with the new UI, I actually realized, oh yeah, that makes sense. Okay. So if I pull it a bit above, it's gonna replace the current panel instead of opening below the current panel. And I was like, and now I don't know if it was like this before, but with the new UI, I discovered it, right? For some reason, it became more apparent, I guess. And yeah, I love the fact that I can customize the stuff easily, just drag and dropping things.
This is a taste of old UI for comparison's sake.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if you could do that before, but that's definitely something that I constantly do. I'm also very mad that I haven't figured out a way to actually have it on every installation, or I can't share settings in a way. I don't know, but I constantly do.
Well, so sharing settings is something that Studio doesn't support. Like the settings sync plugin that is available on IntelliJ is one of the things that we drop when we import changes from the IntelliJ side. That's mostly because it goes on JetBrains backend, and we don't just want to dump stuff in there, I guess. I'm not sure about the technical reasons, but common sense would let me think that that's the reason. Chris can probably confirm if that's the case, but it seems to me like most of the things we drop are related to having JetBrains accounts tied to them.
Yeah. Yeah, I think project sync settings are not quite shared, I think, in settings sync. Well, actually, yeah, because I don't think tool windows, I think the way the platform works today is that tool windows, there is a default configuration for like whenever you open a new project for the first time, whether it's creating a new project or opening it from disk, there is a default set of tool windows that end up showing up. And we actually had to write a custom one for AndroidStudio that we had never done before, actually, which it kind of shows here. So this is the old UI, right? Whenever you open a new project, you get all of these things. Like, and part of the tool windows that do load are also based on plugins. So in this case, if it detects Git, then it will show you all the Git stuff like commit, pull requests, Git. It's the Android plugin, so it loads all the Android plugin tool windows. But when you look at this by default, it's like, okay, especially, I mean, this is my project that I've worked on for a while, but if you start a new project, you know, why would Profiler be there? Like, you're going to profile a new project? Like, it doesn't really make sense. Or even some of these like app quality insights, like you didn't even ship the app, so why do you have this here? So there's a lot of tools here that are important for a developer, like over time, but like getting started, it's like you don't really need half of this stuff. And so we didn't have like a good default tool window, I guess we'll call it configuration. And so for the new UI, that's what we ended up doing, was writing one so that every time you start a new project, then it's the amount of tools that you see by default are trimmed down. And I think it's, yeah, like this is Giraffe. So this is kind of the first new UI, and actually this should not be here. But I think, actually this should not be here either. Oh no, I actually think that is there.
That was,
but some of these,
yeah, I don't remember.
Yeah, this is not a new project, but manager, yeah. But yeah, so generally, I think this is roughly what you would see by default for a new project in AndroidStudio in Giraffe, which is kind of, and Giraffe is it's a little tricky to keep track of all the IntelliJ merges, but Giraffe is based off of IntelliJ 22.3, and that's where the new UI was. Well, the new UI for IntelliJ, the very first preview of it came out in 22.2. And the problem with that was, actually, I think we can show it. Oh no, it's a registry flag. In the old UI, or sorry, in 22.2, it was a registry flag, or actually there was like a special plugin that you had to install, but like, honestly, it's just a registry flag. That's all the plugin was doing. And so, let's see. Yeah, so, oh, wow, I haven't seen this UI in a while. But this was the very first kind of public iteration of the new UI, and so it was very bare bones. Like, yeah, our icons were clearly not redrawn. But like the main toolbar, you only really had run, and so you couldn't actually, it looks like you couldn't actually customize it. I don't know why it says customize, but we couldn't customize it. So like this is all you saw, and so that was a problem. And then like you couldn't the tool windows, you couldn't like dock them underneath each other. They could only be, one at a time like this. Oh, actually, this is a different mode. And so this is what it first looked like. And so when we actually ended up going to Giraffe, we did a lot of Android specific stuff. So the main toolbar, like we put all of these Android specific actions. And this was actually based off of telemetry. So, we gathered telemetry like every product does. And what we found was like on the main toolbar, like most of the actions, actually, I'll have to switch back to the old UI. Oh no, I can't do it. It's in the registry. Registry. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So go back to the old UI. So if you ignore the Git stuff, a lot of these were Android specific up here, and like this section over here, and then this section over here. And our telemetry showed that like the buttons people use the most are really like these three, attach debugger, and that's it. And Gradle sync. So like half of these people barely use or have keyboard shortcuts. And so that's why in the new UI we basically just trimmed it down to I mean, in my mind I would want to trim it down even more, but like we trimmed it down to just this. But we couldn't do this until 22.3 when the new UI went to beta. And so that's why in Flamingo, like you can see the new UI if you turn on the registry flag, but it's not really supported at all because we did 0 changes to Flamingo to support it because there was a lot of extensibility points that we needed in 22.3 from the platform for the new UI that would make it so that people would actually have a good experience with Android Studio. The biggest one actually is this device drop down. We couldn't add this to the main toolbar in Flamingo, and so when people tried the new UI in Flamingo, if they did stumble upon it, you couldn't even select a device. And the only way you could select the device is you had to actually go to like shift and like type in select device, and then the pop-up would show up, which was like super irritating. And so, Giraffe, we're hoping will go stable pretty soon, but like we put all the effort into supporting the new UI in Giraffe because all the platform changes we needed were here to make this like a good first experience for people. Because I think Flamingo, like if you turn on the new UI, it's an okay experience and you get a feel for what the new UI is, but it's pretty hard. I find it's not the easiest to use with Android because just things don't work. You can't customize anything. The drop down's missing. And so, yeah, we didn't feel comfortable like telling people like to try it out in Flamingo because we just didn't do anything for it. Yeah, and I think, but the way that's kind of evolved is like in Hedgehog. So in Hedgehog, this is now based off of, I'll hide this for a second. This is based off of 23.1. And so there are a few design changes that happened. Like one is the main toolbar. So, some people love this blue widget here. I personally love it, but a lot of users on IntelliJ found it was very distracting. They thought like because it's so saturated, especially in the dark theme, it drew their eye too much to it all the time. And so they wanted something that was a little more muted and didn't draw their attention away from their code. And so that's why the design team decided in 23.1 to actually remove this. And so it's the same layout, it's just different colors. And there's like a lot of other things, like I think Ivan mentioned, like the split tool window. So this ability to split the top and the bottom, this was a nice window management feature that you could do in the old UI. And when the team redesigned the new UI, they were trying to figure out like, do people really need that feature? And so that's why in the first iteration in 22.2 and in 22.2 and 22.3, you couldn't split the tool windows because that was an intentional design decision. But there was enough user feedback from the community that said, hey, we really need that, especially for, for myself, I tend to use it in use cases like for build variants, or I think the most common use case is structure. So people like to see, structure and project next to each other. And there's a lot of other use cases, but like that was something that the team added back because of feedback. The other thing they added back was, the bottom right is very lonely and empty, but you can actually move things down there if you really want to. They purposely didn't put anything down there because they want to discourage people from putting things down there, but you can do it if you want. So let's see. I mean, there's a lot of, let's see, what other design changes happened? So one of the interesting things about the new UI, which is there were a lot of features people hated around this menu.
There's
so
one I really, really hate in there.
Yeah, so I think this is actually, I think this is the default settings in 22.3. People hated, well, the preview tab. The funny thing, actually, to step back, what happened in the new UI was some behavior had changed and people were like, this is like, what is this? I'm not used to this. the interesting part was that behavior wasn't it wasn't introduced in the new UI. It was actually just features that were already in the product that were disabled by default. And so what the design team did, because they wanted to like learn from this, is they said, at least for the initial release of the new UI in 22.2, let's just kind of be bold and like turn on a bunch of defaults that, you know, users may not like, but we can at least learn and figure out what they do and don't like. And so a lot of those defaults ended up actually being in this project tree. And so one of them was like enabling the preview tab, which means, you know, as you click through these things, like you kind of get this italic tab here, which means it doesn't actually keep the tab around, and you have to like double click it or edit it to keep it persisted, and then another tab kind of comes up.
Well,
That was turned on by default. Yeah, and like you don't end up seeing it unless you actually like look for it or it bugs you.
Okay.
Another one is like always select open file. This one I think is the one that really irritated people. When you would, let's see if you opened up a bunch of files here, and then like I'll go down here. So what would happen is as you switched files, the project tree would jump.
Okay, I see what you mean.
Actually, so I have to turn it back on. But like, this is what would happen. So people hated this.
Yeah,
and
it's so distracting for me.
Yeah, and the funny thing is, like, we actually, well, so this I think is something that other tools do by default, and I don't know if you can configure. Like VS Code does this by default. And as someone who came from VS Code, I was like, oh, I love this. And I actually turned it on in the old UI because I always liked that behavior. But then I was quick to learn in IntelliJ, people were not used to that behavior. And so the fact that it was turned on by default didn't go over well. So
what do you like it?
No.
Well,
it's like
so
15 years of using IntelliJ, and it's like, no, stop it. Don't do it.
But the funny part is that I trained myself into like muscle memory, the shortcut to actually do that when I want. So basically, is it like Alt F1? I think maybe Option F1, something like this.
It's 2 strokes.
Because
yeah, you're right.
2 strokes.
It's like ta-ta. And when I actually need it, I just do it because I have, you know, my hands on my keyboard, and it happens. But if it happens automatically, at some point it gets distracting for me. And I think it's one of the fascinating things, you know, from a cognitive, you know, how brains work differently with different people. I guess you love it, and for me it's distracting, right? I love the blue color on the toolbar, and people are like, you know, hating it. For me, it's fun. I mean, it's I like colors, right?
Yep.
And it's a nice visual anchor when I want to click the button, because I usually do just Control R to run things, but then when I want to, you know, pick maybe the different configuration or edit configuration, as a nice visual anchor. Okay, that it's on the blue area, or somehow it's easier for me.
Mm-hmm.
How do you track
and
this?
That was,
so I know that IntelliJ and AndroidStudio are gathering data, right? But do you have like very naive click lists, like click events, like you will have on the apps to understand?
Oh boy!
No. I don't want to be super deep. I just like the idea is like every button as an event, and then you go there the same way that I do for apps. Well, like, okay, people are clicking debug more than run, or like they don't use this thing, or the discoverability is bad because they use a lot of shortcuts instead of going through the menu. How do you analyze this stuff? Because this drives decisions, and it's clear, right, that you iterate on the UI also using a lot of data. So
well, I can answer maybe the technical side if you want, Chris, and then you can answer the
Sure.
data-driven decision side of things. So
sure. Yeah.
on the technical side, well, let's start by saying IntelliJ and AndroidStudio collect data in slightly different ways because IntelliJ uses JetBrains' proprietary analytics framework that is called FUS, Feature Usage Statistics, whereas Studio uses the Studio native thing, which I don't know the name for. Chris maybe does. I'm not sure. I haven't looked at that properly yet. But the idea is that everything that you see and do, and you can find in the search everywhere thing in IntelliJ or in Studio, those are so-called actions. So every button that you see on the UI is an action apart from the ones that open tool windows, essentially. And when those are triggered, there is a centralized system that handles actions. So there's like an action manager. And whenever you're clicking an action or triggering with a shortcut an action, then that manager is intercepting that and passing it to the analytics. So they're not instrumented each one at a time. There's like all the actions have an ID. So whenever an action is triggered, there is this central place that says, oh, action with ID banana has been triggered, and that data gets collected. Now, there's not the only kind of data that gets collected, but that's the main one that gets collected. That was a very vague explanation, but it would take an hour to explain properly.
Yeah,
It was clear.
Yeah, but we do look at the usage. I think in this case with the that bug with, or that default option, that was actually, I think someone filed a bug on UTrack and it had a ton of votes, and so I think they just had enough feedback from that they were like, oh yeah, maybe we should not make this the default. And so I think that's actually been kind of an interesting exercise with the new UI as it's progressed through from 22.3 all the way now to 23.2 for the last year, is that every release they'll either they'll try to learn from the users or the community and adjust. And so a lot of it has been reverting the default decisions they made, and then other things are like responding to feature requests. So the thing I just talked about was more of like changing the defaults, but then feature requests were like, hey, we need customization, or like we need this bottom split thing again. And so I think, and kind of I think why I started this whole thing was I really like how they've rolled out the new UI, because there has been products in the past that I've seen that didn't do the same thing, especially with developers, and they just said, oh no, here's the new UI, you can't use the old one, you just have to deal with this new design change. And I think that in those cases they went really poorly. And so I think IntelliJ did a really great thing where they engaged the community. They said, hey, this is something that we want to do. We're giving you a very early look at it so you can try it on your real projects, try it in every day, give us your feedback. Like, we're very open to it. And I think, overall, like, the team has been very receptive to feedback and have been pretty responsive too. And so I like all the changes I've seen throughout the iterations have been because the team was listening. And the other thing too is we work with them, like we AndroidStudio, we work with them a lot too. And so a lot of the design changes you saw were because, we had said, hey, we kind of anticipated, we're like, this isn't going to go well with our users. And so it'd really be great if you could like make this configurable, or like change this default, or like make sure we can do these things. And so that's kind of what I have been doing for the last year, is spending a lot of time on my side, tracking the changes that are happening upstream, and then making sure that they work well for us in Android. Because, if a design decision ends up happening in the platform upstream, and then by the time we get it, that change has already been, done 6 months ago, it's hard to kind of like ask them to change it at that point. So I spend a lot of time working with trying to fix things and address things upstream. But yeah, so because of that, I think the rollout has gone relatively pretty smooth. The thing that people are worried about is like, when will the old UI be deprecated? I'm pretty sure it will be. The team seems to that's the desire the team wants. Part of it is like maintenance, because it's like, you know, I think this is the challenge we actually have now in Android Studio is maintenance. Like with the old UI there and the new UI there, every feature we have kind of for at least the next year or so has to kind of work in both. It may not look great in both, but it has to function in both. And so that does add maintenance costs for us. It does for IntelliJ as well. And so long term, it's like we really don't want to have to maintain four different themes. You know, the old UI light and dark, and then the new UI light and dark. So I think what they are doing is like I said, they're giving the feedback, and I believe what will happen is once the new UI is default for new installations, then it will probably be another year or so when the old UI is deprecated. That's the plan, though. It's not for certain, and like I said, like they're very open to feedback and receptive. So those plans could change depending on how it goes. So, and on the studio side, we would kind of follow a similar thing. What we are doing in Hedgehog, which is kind of a sneak peek, is we are enabling the new UI by default, or that's our plan for new installations. So what it means is like if you install AndroidStudio for the very first time on your machine, or like you install a new version of Studio and you don't import your config from a previous installation, you will see the new UI by default. Which is good because I think for some existing users, like we don't want to like change it out from under them when they upgrade from Giraffe to Hedgehog. So we're not going to do that, at least initially. So it'll be some time before that happens. But yeah, I think the larger public release of the new UI will first show up in Giraffe when it goes stable. Then Hedgehog is when we will change it as the default for new installations.
I am, for one, very much looking forward to that becoming the default. I'm sure there's gonna be some pushback, because there's always gonna be some pushback about anything you do. But as we were saying earlier, people have opinions. But in this case, I think it's for the best. It's like, as a plugin author, even like in this case, okay, sure, I'm working on a plugin that is bundled with the IDE, but even just supporting the new UI, because StudioBot is mostly designed to work with the new UI. It will function if you're not using new UI, but it looks much better if you're using it with the new UI. And just even supporting properly dark theme, light theme changes and runtime, like all of that is a pain. And if you need to also support old UI, that means that there is so much more complexity, because you have 4 themes, and then you have some things that don't come from the theme, because the rendering, drawing side of things, colors and stuff, that comes from the theme. But maybe in the old UI, the spacing would be slightly different. And that sort of stuff, it's hard to do from the theme. So that means that you have to start doing if-elses in the code. And so when Chris is saying that there is a maintenance cost to supporting both, there is an actual very concrete maintenance cost. And most of the UI, well, one of the impressive things is that most of the UI in new UI and in old UI is rendered by the same Swing code. There are very few if-elses in there to change the appearance and behavior of buttons and whatnot. There are some, and sometimes they bite you in the ass, but most of the code is the same, and what changes is the theme that says you use this padding and that color and this drawing like border color, whatever. But some stuff is more fundamental, and it's harder to express in the theme, and that is the stuff that requires maintenance the most.
Yep.
Oh well, this is the end of my
Yep.
rant. So I'm sorry, it's just I've been working on this so much recently. And I'm like,
Simplify.
Can we drop the old UI already?
Simplify.
I mean,
And I think what's still the thing that they didn't have this in the very first release of the new UI, which is configuration, but ever since 22.3, like everything has become more and more configurable, which has been useful for us as a plugin, but also useful for the users. So like, this is what the default looks like. And there is a funny bug here where in Giraffe, apply changes and the apply changes buttons actually need to be disabled, but they're not. They are technically disabled because when you click them, nothing happens. But they're supposed to actually look disabled, which you can see in Hedgehog, which we couldn't fix that in the platform. So, but you don't have to have these. Like, I don't usually use this action very much, and so it's nice that I can just remove it. And like I can actually, to be honest, I do a lot of compose now, so I don't necessarily use apply changes. I just use live edit. So oftentimes, and I don't actually use search because I already know what the search everywhere shortcut is. So like most of the times, like this is actually what my configuration looks like. And I like it a lot because it's minimalistic for me. But for some people, they don't like that, or they want to add other actions, and you can customize. This is the right side, but you can customize. The main toolbar actually has 3 customization areas, which it didn't have in the past. It has the right, the center, and the left. But you can always restore the defaults back to this. And then kind of the thing with tool windows that we talked about, which I'll just reiterate, is like, once you open that tool window, then it's there. So like the next time you open this specific project, this will be there. And you can move it anywhere you want. And so a lot of people were like, oh, you're hiding all the features. And it's like, no, they're just in this drop down here. And as soon as you open it, then it's there. And so for features that people use often, then like, it will behave naturally where it will stay. And for ones that you don't, you can just hide them and then bring them back if you want to. And there's like other design changes they had to make. Go ahead.
Sorry. No, sorry. I think there's a delay because it seems like I'm constantly talking on
you seem to be lagging every now and then, so it might be that you're having internet troubles as usual.
Fingers crossed it's gonna change in a few weeks. Fingers crossed. You're
gonna start digging and bringing the fiber to your place yourself.
They are no. They are gonna do it. Apparently, there is because I'm a freelancer. Apparently, there is something that they should advance. It should work in my favor once in a lifetime. I have a question about the UI of initial projects, like new projects UI. So I always get the Android view at the top left, and I always change it to project view. And recently I get a survey that asks, why did you change it? And
yeah,
I like a few of the options, but there is never like the one that I always pick, like, because I want to search for the source code in a better way, or the another one is like source resources in a better way, but there is no choice for I just like it the way it looks. Like there was like, because that will be for me the most honest one to pick, like, because I'm used to the project one. I have the project view in every tool that I use, or Visual Studio Code, or whatever, like Finder or Explorer. So do you use that kind of feedback, or is more like we need to ask people because is it gonna affect in a way the fact that I'm stubborn and I don't want to use the Android view?
The second one is the one you're looking for, I think.
No, I think this one.
No, that's a different one.
There is a.
You need a property. It's not
flag
in the registry. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm gonna find it. Don't worry.
Yeah. So the project view is actually like an interesting conversation that's not about the new UI, but it is about the UI in general. Yeah. So that survey, I am very much involved with that survey. Part of the challenge we've seen is like a lot of people, and I understand the feedback too. Like a lot of folks are like, I don't understand why the Android view exists. One of the challenges is, and I think this is kind of what happens with design in general, or like when you make default decisions that you have to live with for a long time. The Android view was there, even before my time on the team, and so over time, because that was the default, like so many people, like a lot of people either got used to it or, like you said, just moved to the project view. But like a lot of our books and like content, especially Google's content, shows the Android view by default. And so historically, it's like we're like, well, we can't just drop the Android view because it's used everywhere as default. And so if we just dropped it, that might confuse folks. The other part is like that survey, which you mentioned, we've actually gotten it hasn't actually skewed in the way we thought. Our hypothesis was like, oh, I think a lot of people are going to like vote that they hate the Android view and they would never use it. But we've actually found it's kind of split. And so there are people who actually do like the Android view for some reasons. Like I think a couple reasons we've known people have expressed is like the depth of the tree is much more shallow, especially for Android projects. And so like, modules are kind of at the top level versus with project, depending how it works, right? By the time you get to main, it's like 4 levels deep. So some people don't like that. They like the shallowness of the Android tree. They like things, believe it or not, some people like the fact that the Gradle scripts are all in one node at the top level. For me, as more on the designer side, like I appreciate that resources are organized this way differently than they are in Project View. Because in Project View, they're more like, they're literally reflecting the directory structure. So you kind of have to
that's the main driver for me. So the fact that it's the same structure that I will find if I open a terminal and I do ls, or if I open Finder, right? So I don't have that mental split of remembering actually. Yeah, this is the thing that I was mentioning. So perfect. So the idea that what I see in AndroidStudio is what I see on disk, right? Maybe it's naive, or is as Coding Pizza says in the chat, is just an old man habit that I'm so biased to what the real thing looks like. I want to see reflected in the tool that I'm using, or maybe it's just habit. But I'm fascinating about how the survey will later affect, because we are talking about killing old things. So right, I'm wondering if at some point AndroidStudio will always only have the Android view.
I think we are trying to collect data to argue to. I think the team is trying to argue to remove the Android view.
Okay.
Well, yeah, which is I think the controversial point, at least internally. So, as Seb had mentioned, I think it will be in Hedgehog. It should be in I think the property is already there. You can set it so that the project view is the default for anytime you open up a new project, which I think would satisfy a ton of people. Because I think when I was kind of talking to the team about it, we were kind of thinking about it's like, okay, well, once you open this project and you switch to project, every other time you open this project, it's project. It's not going to be on Android. And so I was thinking how much work are we really going to do to save one click? That was kind of my very snarky way of talking about it.
If I can set it as a default for new project, it will be the same. Do you remember there was something similar to layouts, right? At some point you were you could specify, just give me the XML, don't give me the XML plus preview, right? So you could actually choose so that will work, right? That will work for me, because I am telling you, just stop suggesting the Android view, give me the project view. We are friends. I mean, if people want to use the Android view, fantastic. If it's not a maintenance burden, that's great, right? If there is a feature that I don't use but it's there and it's useful for other people, I love it. But again, give me the possibility to
there
perform.
is some maintenance cost to keeping the Android view around, and that's why there is a discussion about whether it should stick around or not.
So
I imagine.
Yeah. So like adding that configuration option actually was the easiest thing we could do. But I think what we discussed is like that part is easy. Like we could probably do that, and like Seb has shown, it's just a property thing, and I think we'll have a checkbox somewhere in settings for you to do that. But I think we wanted to take a harder look at it and say like, well, if we're looking at this specific problem, like, are there other things about the Android view? Like, could we improve things about the Android view that we haven't really improved? Like, because I think, to my knowledge, the team hasn't really made any changes to the Android view for a really long time. And, one of the biggest critiques of it is like, you don't see files you just don't see certain files like readmes or configuration files in the Android view, which is super irritating. And so that's why I think the survey went away. But
I think there was some minor change in Hedgehog, because I remember something going through, but it was mostly functional stuff.
Yeah. So, I think the easy thing we're going to have is you can default it to the project view, which I think will make a lot of people happy. But we also want to like dig deeper and say, hey, like, we're not trying to convince people to use the Android view, but we're trying to figure out, like, while we're here and talking about this, like, what could we improve about the Android view? So that's why the survey asks things about like why you switched, because if there are things we can do in the Android view that would help people so that they don't have to switch back and forth too many times, then I think that could be helpful. But I think the smallest thing we can commit to was that configuration option, which is, I think that's the one thing that we will for sure do in Hedgehog. So,
I mean, you can even approach it on the other side, like, if people are defaulting on project and then they need to click to actually go to the Android view, that you will also know, okay, we have like some people that are just used to not touching the panel at all, other people that want the specific view because it's useful for the manifest, right? They have a lot of manifest and they want to have them grouped or whatever, right? So, but at least that you can understand how many people are there, right? It will be just interesting from a statistical point of view. And again, one of the thing, I don't hate the Android view because groups things or hides things. It's just because it doesn't look like the disk looks like. So, and that bothers me. And then at that point, you can argue, well, because the disk is not right, optimized for navigation and things like that, right? So it could be an endless discussion about how we navigate a file system, and that's a very interesting discussion about UX, I guess, because I hate the tree structure of a file system because I would like to have labels, and I tried over years, like because I got used to Gmail, right? Gmail started this whole one thing can be in two folders at the same time, because maybe you have an invoice and you will put it in an invoices folder, but at the same time maybe you want all your electricity bills together, right? And then what? You have a electricity bills folder. So, and then you start adding labels because that gives you the power of having the same thing in two places at the same time. So I think it's a very complex topic, but for the simplicity of the feedback, having the project view mirroring how the things look on the file system, it's my main factor to switch from the Android view. I guess I'm a simple person.
Well, it's it's really interesting because you're right about that. Like, I think that connection between like what it reflects on disk versus what it shows in the tool is actually something I think a lot of people take for granted, because I guess I think the way I've talked about it in the past and the way it's been termed from the UX point of view is like there are kind of two perspectives on the project view. It's like you either show it in the physical view, which it's not physical because it's digital, but you show it as like it maps exactly one-to-one to the file system. And that's kind of what we call like the physical view of it. And then there's a different perspective called the logical view. And the logical view is subjective, but it's like logical to the thing, the task you're trying to solve. So in this case, Android is a logical view on top of the file system because it's trying to show you this is the things you should care about from an Android project perspective. And actually, Visual Studio does this a lot with the Solution Explorer, which the story there is, so like Visual Studio has its own project system, IntelliJ has its own project system, but the thing that Visual Studio does that goes farther is the Solution Explorer ends up being a logical view on top of your file system. So if you're doing C#, it shows you the project, but that's not actually what it looks like on disk. And people, at least for Microsoft, loved or got used to that view a lot. But then what happened was like Visual Studio became an IDE that people used for other platforms like web. And so when web developers started using Visual Studio, they were like, why do I have to open this folder in a solution? Like, I don't even know what a solution is. Like, why is it introducing IDE configuration files to my project that don't make any sense? And so one of the biggest pieces of friction we saw for people trying to do web development in Visual Studio, especially when it wasn't a Microsoft stack like C# or ASP.NET, was the project view. They were like, we can't use it because it doesn't look like the disk, what's on disk. And so that actually kind of segues into a fun story about VS Code. So when we first worked on VS Code, or when I first worked on VS Code when we launched, one of the biggest controversial discussions we had was, do we show the file system, like do we show the project as it looks on disk, or do we have like a solution explorer or like a logical view for people? And because of all the legacy baggage of Microsoft, like you had 20 years of people, executives and leadership saying, no, you have to support the solution view. And we were like a smaller team that was like a brand new product that was going to be on Mac and Linux, which never happened before at Microsoft. And we were like, no, we absolutely can't do that. Like developers that we're going after, which at the time were like JavaScript, Python, like all non-Microsoft developers, it's like they don't even know what a solution is. Like they just know I have a folder, I have code in it, just show me that.
Show me that.
And so we had like it was like a week-long debate about what to do. Because we were getting all this pressure from leadership saying like, well, if you don't support the solution view, then all these Microsoft developers that we have are going to be very confused and not want to adopt VS Code. And we're like, yeah, that's fine. We don't really care about them right now. Like we didn't build VS Code to go after the Microsoft developers. They built it to go after
It's like
the non-Microsoft developers.
Let them pay for Visual Studio proper.
Yeah. And so that's kind of why VS Code looks like that today, is because they were like, we're not going to support this like logical view because it doesn't make sense as a polyglot IDE. And so when I started using IntelliJ, I kind of appreciated that it's like there is an IntelliJ project system, and they have some stuff in this .idea folder, but for the most part, this view is what it is on disk. So I think IntelliJ does strike that right balance, and so whenever I see the Android view, it reminds me of that whole conversation. And I think there are pros and cons to it, but it is nice that you can kind of switch between the two. But yeah, having a default to always at least show this, I think, is what people want, and so that will be delivered shortly.
As you say, it's just one click away from what I'm used to use. But then when the survey started popping up, I was like, okay, now it's not one click anymore. So now it's like 3 clicks, and now I have to think, okay, is it the same reason? Yes. And now I started playing with this. One time was like source code. I want to read sources file better. And then the second time was like, because I was reinstalling a lot of stuff. And I was like, okay, now I'm going to pick resource. I want to explore resource file better, and I picked all of them. At some point, I was like, okay, so this is, and I was wondering, but again, it's just one click away. But I was curious about why you're pushing to use the Android view more, or is it just like for a broader study about usability?
Mm-hmm. I think we're trying to just gather more recent information about how people use the Android view, since I think our knowledge is outdated. Although you mentioned that survey, and I would probably should take it out soon, because I think at some point it will be annoying to see it pop up every time. So
it's just because I reinstalled 15 million AndroidStudio in the last weeks, because between two machines, and at some point I got stuck with there was a bug in a commit windows, and I started bothering Sebastiano, and he told me maybe they fixed it, update. So, and here we go again. And he was fixed indeed. So, I had a lot of reinstallations lately.
I think that I'm looking at the chat. I was going to go back to Maya's question about Fleet. Yes, so it is a different product and code base. It is actually a different engineering team too, though it's not a different design team. The designers on IntelliJ platform actually do part-time work on Fleet, and so I think the team definitely wanted to make sure that Fleet and IntelliJ are their own distinct design, but there's a ton of things that they do share. Like the icon style is very much similar. The color schemes are a little similar, although I think in Fleet they are going a little more experimental. Like I think when they first launched Fleet, actually you can kind of see it now. It's like it was very dark, like very black, like true black, like 000. And so what I've seen them do is like they kind of use both as kind of a way. They use Fleet as a way to kind of like experiment more and kind of learn from more, because Fleet has less users. People are less used to the UI, or more. They're not as like emotionally or like professionally attached to the UI as they are to IntelliJ. And so it gives them more flexibility to experiment. And so I think often what can happen is if an interesting idea ends up working out really well in Fleet, it would not be surprising if it shows up in IntelliJ. But they do try to make design decisions that make sense for either one, because they just have different users at this point, and like definitely different technologies. So like Fleet is a new code base. It's not using Swing. It's using T as the renderer, but it's using this internal toolkit they called Noria, which is actually very similar to Compose for desktop. But because it's a newer toolkit, like you can get really nice animations. And so even like basic ones like the window opening and closing, like, IntelliJ, it's really just hide or show. So so I think there's the UI, I think, is also much more responsive, I think, in Fleet, since it's a newer code base and it's not Swing. So but Fleet, I think, has there are design decisions in Fleet that are kind of odd. Like I think it borrows from Xcode a lot. Like this kind of view switcher thing is a very Xcode thing. VS Code now has this. But it also does have a lot of IntelliJ like capabilities, like the fact that there's all these like different tools and you can like move the tools around. It is still using like the IntelliJ engine when it goes into smart mode. So you get all the, refactoring and code analysis from there. But yeah, like the way you manage projects, it's a whole different thing. And frankly, I'm still confused about what workspace really means, but that's kind of, I think, the the fun part with Fleet is they are able to experiment. They can't do these kind of experiments on IntelliJ because people would get really mad. So, but yeah, it's the same design team. So I work with the designers both. So I actually kind of also use Fleet a lot because it's it could be the future of the IntelliJ platform. So it's something that we kind of keep our eye on too is like, from a UX point of view, is like, you know, in an imaginary world, it's like, could you use Fleet to do Android? Maybe. But if that were the case, like, are there design decisions in Fleet that would prevent people from being productive on an Android project? And that's kind of like what I've been spending some time looking into is like, you know, could you do Android development here? Maybe. So, but yeah, the UIs are pretty similar.
I think Fleet also supports, like it's focused around a different way of working in the sense that it's primarily meant to be used away from the brains. So the code doesn't need to be local. The intelligence, like you can run Fleet on a very lightweight machine, like Chromebook level hardware. Obviously, it doesn't run on a Chromebook, but you get the idea, like a lightweight laptop. And then the brains can run somewhere in the cloud on your backend, whatever. So that's kind of also changing considerably the way that the IDE is meant to be used, because you're not necessarily running things locally. Most people that use FleetBeast today probably do still, but it's not the same thing as IntelliJ.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. How much time do we have left?
-3 minutes.
Okay.
We are overflowing technically.
Let's go for the last question.
Yeah, let's go for the last questions that we have in the chat.
I will just respond to Mark saying, you can blame me for both the decision and you can blame me for all decisions around logcat icon.
Wait, what?
The logcat icon is amazing.
Yeah, there was the cat, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is it? Yeah, this one. Did you change it?
No, what happened was back in 2017, when IntelliJ did, they had this whole effort to like make all their icons look uniform and modern, or at least like a consistent style. And so they redesigned all of them. And so we redesigned all our studio icons to kind of fit that style. And in that moment, because I didn't know any better, I was like, oh yeah, I don't understand this Nyan cat thing. And so I decided to told the team to change the icon to like 3 lines to look like a very simplistic log icon. And I remember when that happened, people were not too happy about it. And I didn't think of anything of it at that time. But then when the new UI came along and we were redesigning the icons, one thing that did immediately happen was we couldn't use the 3 lines because there's another tool window in here called messages, which doesn't show up here, but that uses the same 3 lines. And so because you don't have the text for the tool window next to it, you could easily confuse it. And so I was like, okay, well, we definitely need a distinct icon for logcat. And then I remembered my design decision that I made years ago, and I was like, okay, I think it's time to bring back the actual cat. And so when I worked with the folks that helped us with the icons, I said, this might sound like a weird request, but like, can you draw something that's like has a cat but has a log aspect to it? And they were like, oh, okay. And so then they drew this, and I was like, yes, exactly. That's what we want. So, yeah.
And they were like, what the hell just happened?
Yeah. They're like, I don't know what this logcat thing is, but sure.
And I'm actually afraid to ask. So it was like, let's go with the icon. This is the icon. Do you like it? Yes, ship it.
Yeah.
I love it.
But that actually, I think one thing we did have fun with on the icons was because we got to redesign a lot of them. Like I wanted to bring some fun back to AndroidStudio, and so like logcat is one of them. Actually, app inspection is a funny one too, because
is that Hector?
People picked up on it. Yeah, it's a detective, so it's got a little top hat.
It's a detective, yeah.
Yeah.
I love it.
Because I think before it was like a silhouette, and it was kind of hard to decipher what that silhouette was at 13 by 13. And so, yeah, I asked the designers, hey, like we should we should have fun with this one too. And so that's why we kind of made this little head here with a hat. So
I love it.
So
Yeah.
speaking of fun icons, there used to be in IntelliJ in the bottom right corner an icon that was where you toggle the inspections on and off and stuff like that, that you now do in the editor. It makes a lot more sense to do it in the editor. But the thing I loved about that icon is that it was like a guy with a hat. And the informal name for it was Hector, the inspector. And unfortunately, it was removed, but there is a plugin that I just put in the chat from a person that works at JetBrains that brings it back.
Oh.
So, yeah.
Love it.
You have Hector the inspector. I really was pushing when I was working at JetBrains, asking if they could like make t-shirts with Hector. I would have loved them.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I was told no.
Oh,
Yeah, well.
that's a bummer.
Yeah.
So are we getting the t-shirt for the Locat icon now? I heard you, Chris, right? You say that, right, Sebastian? No? Did he say it? Did he say?
I mean,
yeah, he said, I'm gonna just send you t-shirts with the Locat icon, right? No?
Yeah.
I mean, maybe it's in the recording. Maybe I'm just making this up. Who knows?
I mean, I think at some point I think I shared this picture on Twitter, but yeah, I was like, it would be kind of cool to do this as like a t-shirt one day. Just a black t-shirt, and then have this grid of icons in the front, and that's it, and like no other branding, just that.
Oh, just that. I mean, if you know, you know. And if you don't know, why do you care, right?
Yeah.
I love it. Well, I think it's just a matter of copyrights, right? I'm just naive here. It's just like a legal question, just to print them. I'm not suggesting.
Are you
that
asking
we
that
them.
can you print a t-shirt with those icons?
No. I mean, but that would be the case, right?
I mean, technically, the SVGs are inside of Studio, so they should be licensed like Studio, which is Apache too, technically.
Yeah. So
I guess we have.
I'm not a lawyer though, so there's that.
Oh yeah, well, I mean, we can ask. Legal@google.com. Pretty sure they're gonna answer me.
Yes.
I'm sure what I'll see is there will be a t-shirt up on the Code with Italians merch site. It's like Logcat.
Yes, that would be cool. I mean, this is great. I mean, I love it.
No, we're gonna, given it kind of looks like our pizza progress bar plugin, we just replace the cat icon with a pizza outline, and then that's the t-shirt.
That's a t-shirt.
No
but
copyright.
I wouldn't sacrifice. But I wouldn't sacrifice the cat because I like the cat. We need to pick some icon that we can sacrifice. Something that we don't need or we don't.
Oh yeah.
We don't want. Look at that! It's so cute. I love it.
Yeah, you can see all the random iterations. Like I think this was what they started with, and I was like, oh, that's really hard to see at 16 by 16 or 20 by 20. So.
Yeah, but that's super Nyan cat. That's very close to.
I don't know. To me, it looks more like the Studio Ghibli cat bus from My Neighbor Totoro. Just put a couple of windows in the main part, and it's that.
Yeah,
love it.
Okay, should we wrap up? Because Ivan, I think you have things to do. Grown-up things to do.
Yeah, work. It's called work, Sebastiano. It's called provide for your family. And also time zones.
Yeah.
And also I hate time zones. Oh, man. Anyway, we won't complain. We won't complain. We do our best with what we have. And that's it.
Cool.
Chris, this was fun. Thank you for being with us in a Design with Italian fashion. It was a very nice episode. I love it.
I think we should do it again. I want to talk about the StudioBot UI as well. Not because I worked on it, but because I think it's very interesting. There's a lot of cool little things, especially in the new timeline that we've just shipped in the latest cannery. It's very cool.
When is gonna be available to everybody? Because I think it's
I have no idea. As soon as we can is I think the answer.
I understand.
No, I literally don't know.
Sure, I don't believe you. Stop lying. I still don't believe you.
I said it publicly on Twitter. Like, what we end up doing is we're following Bard's lead, and so as Bard, if Bard is open to specific countries, we will probably be open up to those countries. That's like shortly after. I can't say exactly how much time after, but like that's usually what we wait for. Is like. So now I think Bard was announced to be open to more folks or more countries at I/O, and I think some of those countries include like India, which is I think the person asked on Twitter about that. But yeah, that's usually how you can kind of track it unofficially is like whenever Bard is open to this country, StudioBot's likely to follow. So
fantastic. So fingers crossed. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, I'm the first person that wants this to happen. So you're preaching to the choir here.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
Cool. Thank you very much, Chris. Ivan, go for it. I mean, go for it.
Buy the keychain. Buy the t-shirts.
All the t-shirts.
Amazon Prime subscription, all the t-shirts. If you have, and also the new ones that are coming soon. So apart from that, if you have an Amazon Prime subscription, please connect it to your Twitch account and you can subscribe to our channel for free. It supports us buying things like this and the stickers that we send to our viewers via giveaways that we run every month. So thank you for the support. If you want to join the after episode chat, check out our subscriptions on Coffee. You have the bruschetta tier that allows you to enter the Discord server, and from the Discord server you will have the link for the Meet chat. So if you want to say hello to our guest, Mark Ellison is usually there. Sebastiano works on the clickbait thumbnail. Just join the bruschetta tier. Thank you for the support. And if you are watching this on YouTube, like and subscribe.
It had to happen.
Yeah. Smash the subscribe button.
So, next week, we are going to have a guest that has never been with us before. It's another Daniele, because we have more than one Daniele to share with you all. But also, technically, Ivan is also a guest, I guess. Because we're talking about the apps that you're working on, with Daniele and the others. So you're technically a guest as well, I guess. Yes, I don't know.
Yeah, well, I mean, we will see at some point. As long as I don't ask the question and also make the answer, like at work.
I will be asking questions. Don't worry.
Fair enough. So yes, because you saw the links in the chat. We are working on a couple of new apps. And yeah, let's talk more about that. See you next week.